Hello, welcome. I'm Charlotte Gibson, president of Charlottesville Now. Welcome to our October chapter meeting program. So glad you all are joining us. Tonight, we're delving into 3 hot button issues in Virginia: potential threats to abortion access, transgender student rights, and equitable representation of women in public school curriculum. 4 experts will address these topics tonight. Before welcoming each of them, I'll share a little background on the issues. Regarding abortion rights, in just a few years, Virginia went from a state with many barriers to abortion to one of the more accessible states. But there is nothing to prevent new lawmakers from making Virginia like Texas, with laws effectively banning all abortions. The U.S. Supreme Court let the Texas abortion ban stand and will soon hear a Mississippi case that directly targets Roe v. Wade. In Virginia, now chapters will try to preserve abortion access by working to codify Roe in Virginia through a constitutional amendment that guarantees bodily autonomy. Currently, abortion is covered in the criminal, not the civil code in Virginia. Tonight, Galina, Varchena of NARAL and Han Jones of Planned Parenthood will help us understand what is at stake. Hello, Galina. Galina's having trouble unmuting. There we go. Hi, Galina. Welcome. Glad you could join us.
Hi.
And Han Jones from Planned Parenthood. Hi, Han. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here and speaking to such wonderful activists. I recognize many of you from being an organizer in Charlottesville a few years back.
Yes. Well, thank you both for being here. And then our next topic regarding transgender student rights. In response to laws enacted by the Virginia General Assembly, the Virginia Department of Education developed model policies for the treatment of transgender students in public elementary and secondary schools. All school boards received the policies and were required to implement them in schools by the beginning of the 2021 school year. Many school systems have adopted the policies, but some have resisted, making them subject to legal action and the associated expenses. But the greatest cost is borne by the students caught in the crossfire of competing ideologies. Tonight, Donna Price, attorney and vice chair of the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors, will help shed light on this issue. Hello, Donna. Welcome, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And finally, regarding equitable representation of women in school curriculum, a national study revealed that of 737 named historical figures, only 178 were women, 1 for every 3 men. To give her students a chance to view the world through more than the white male perspective, a Virginia teacher created a women and gender studies course. Now her work is being expanded through the Virginia Gender Equity and Education Coalition, which aims to have all high schools in Virginia include the course as an elective. In addition, the coalition is working toward getting legislation passed to require that women be appropriately represented in all core curriculum in Virginia schools, because you can't be what you can't see. Charlottesville Now is part of this coalition. Tonight, that teacher, Jessica Berg, is here to share her important work. Hi, Jessica. Welcome, so glad to have you.
Thank you so much.
And as we start the program, a few housekeeping notes here. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted later to our YouTube channel. You can find that link in the chat. The program is divided into 2 parts with Q&A time after each segment. Please put your questions for the presenters in the chat as they occur to you when they're speaking. And I want to thank you to Virginia Doherty, who will moderate the abortion rights segment, and to Amy Lawfer, who will moderate the school issues segment. Amy and Virginia, you want to give a little wave so people can see you? As you'll hear, considerable effort will be required for many people to sustain or make more progress on these issues. Please consider joining in one or more of these efforts. Just note in the chat you're willing to help, and we'll email you any volunteer opportunities that come up. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you all to join Charlottesville Now and get involved in the fight for these issues and many other issues. And now I'll introduce Kathy Falzer, Charlottesville Now's VP of Action and Programs, who will get the program started and introduce our speakers. Kathy, thank you and your committee for helping put this great program together.
Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you to all of our speakers for being here and our members for attending this evening. I'd just like to report that last month's chapter meeting, which gave our members a chance to take action in the current election by phone banking, some of us for the very first time, for the coordinated campaign for Virginia, turned out to be a success. Philip Neidhart of the campaign reported back to us that in 2 hours, we'd made over 250 phone calls and talked to 35 individuals, which he assured us in the realm of phone banking were very good numbers. I would be remiss as Varchena co-chair of Albemarle County if I did not mention how important it is for everyone to vote early, by mail, or at the polls on November 2nd. It is a much tighter race than anyone expected, but if Democrats come out and vote, we will win by sheer numbers, as proven by Joe Biden's election by over 10 percentage points in Virginia in 2020. Please encourage your friends and family to vote as well. And if anybody wants a last-minute McAuliffe Ayala Herring yard sign or barred sign, please let me know. I put my information in the chat, and I will do my best to see that it's delivered to you this weekend. So thank you very much. And now down to business. Galina Varchena is the policy director for NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia, leading their policy work with the General Assembly and local governments. Galina also works to foster relationships with NARAL's partner organizations and local communities, and has a deep drive to promote social justice in all its forms, and especially with respect to reproductive freedom. Previously, Galina has worked as an attorney fighting for social and environmental justice and women's rights in civil, criminal, and administrative proceedings. Galina, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. Very much appreciate it. And I'm glad you all are plugged in and doing amazing work on this election. It's so important. And as mentioned by folks ahead of me, and I'm sure will be mentioned after, go out and vote, get your friends to vote, get your neighbors to vote, participate in those phone banks. Every vote counts. This election is very close. But to the point of my particular portion of this talk or presentation or panel, so as you all have probably seen in the news, there are two kind of cases percolating, one already in the Supreme Court, and the other one the Justice Department has asked the Supreme Court to take a look at. So let's start with the Mississippi case. So the Mississippi case, as you all probably know, is Dosby-Jackson Women's Health Organization and will be heard on December 1st at the Supreme Court. The decision is likely to come out next spring or summer. It's a case about a 15-week abortion ban in Mississippi, and that is a pre-viability ban, which is a direct attack on the standards set out in Roe and confirmed in Casey and other Supreme Court precedent. Also, additionally, Mississippi has asked the Supreme Court directly to look at overturning Roe in its kind of final brief to the court, which means that this is an issue now before the Supreme Court. What does that mean? As of right now, Virginia is in a pretty good place in some ways. We have repealed some of the worst restrictions on abortion, but we still have some restrictions on the books found in the criminal code in Virginia, actually, which is not great. But our surrounding states are doing much worse. So if Roe is overturned or severely gutted, which is another likely scenario, then abortion will become inaccessible pretty much south of us to Florida, although in Florida they are now going to put forth an SB 8 version, an SB 8 bill, according to their legislature. And then westward, as like far out to Kentucky, Tennessee, down to California. And so vast swaths of the country will not have abortion access or will lose significant abortion access should Roe be overturned, because they already have either trigger bans, that means laws on the books that will come into effect if Roe is overturned to either severely restrict abortion or ban abortion altogether. For example, in West Virginia, there's a constitutional amendment saying that nothing in West Virginia, that the West Virginia Constitution does not protect the right to abortion. And essentially, if Roe is overturned, they can ban abortion. It will be banned. Other states have pre-Roe bans. So in 1973, the Supreme Court said that abortion is a constitutional right. And while some states changed their laws to conform with that decision, other states retained bans on the books and never repealed them. So if Roe is overturned, there is some consensus in the legal community that some of those bans will essentially just come back into effect in those states. North of us, states are doing pretty well, DC, Maryland, etc. But folks from the South and West will really need somewhere to go to get reproductive health care. So when we're talking about Virginia, it's not just important for us to retain and expand access and rights to reproductive access, including abortion, for the folks who live right here, but also for all of those people who are going to lose access as soon as the court reaches its decision. Going back to, as you all have also heard, Texas implemented SB 8, which is a law that bans abortion after 6 weeks. At 6 weeks, many people don't even know they're pregnant or have recently found out that they're pregnant. And that bans virtually all abortions in Texas. But not just that, this particular law is incredibly insidious because it says that it's not the state that will enforce the law. It creates a civil right of action for any individual in or out of Texas to be able to sue anyone except the pregnant person themselves, anyone who aids or abets them in getting an abortion after 6 weeks. That means abortion providers. That means your Uber driver who takes you to a clinic. That means your friend who loans you some money to go get an abortion elsewhere. All of those people are suddenly under threat of a lawsuit for $10,000 from anyone at all, like in the state of Texas or outside of Texas. And we now know that a bunch of states are looking at this law as a model and are looking to the Supreme Court to see what is the Supreme Court going to do with this law. It's a little bit convoluted what sort of has happened so far procedurally, but essentially there was a case started by some abortion providers in the state, sued the state in federal court to say, hey, we think this law is unconstitutional. We needed to make a ruling. That case is still, the body of that case is still pending in federal court in Texas. But as the deadline for the law to go into effect came closer and closer, those abortion providers went to the Fifth Circuit and then to the Supreme Court asking for an emergency stay or an emergency injunction to enjoin the law from being enforced while the case kind of makes its way through the courts. The Supreme Court said, no, the case is not ripe. It's not time. there hasn't been any damage. We're not enjoining the law. You have to go through the entire process, and eventually when the law gets to us, we might do something about it. We're not ruling on the merits, but we're not stopping the law from going into effect. So the law has gone into effect. Then the Department of Justice, the Biden administration, also filed a lawsuit on very similar grounds with a federal court in Texas asking that the law be enjoined. That federal court did stay the law. However, the Fifth Circuit reversed that stay. So while there were a few abortions that did happen during that like a couple days when the law was not in effect, as of right now, the law is in effect. It's a 6-week ban, and abortion providers in Texas are not performing abortions after 6 weeks, partly for fear of kind of what's these civil penalties, this bounty system that the state has instituted. What has been the effect of the law? From what we hear from abortion providers in Texas and outside of Texas, in the states surrounding Texas, is that there are a lot of people who are not able to get health care. There are a lot of people who are trying to get health care, but the abortion providers right around sort of the border have long waiting lists at this point. It's hard to get outside of the state because travel and cost and taking time off work, all of those things. And getting an abortion in Texas was already not easy. So this has made it virtually impossible for a lot of folks. And this is affecting low-income people, people of color, people in rural communities. So as always, as all of these bans, these affect folks who need the health care the most and are least able to afford to jump through these hoops the most. So people of color, low-income folks, etc. And if other states institute laws like this, if the Supreme Court says that this law is just fine because it's not the state who is enforcing the law, but it's private citizens who are enforcing the law, and you have to battle it out with private citizens, and you can't just sue the state and get these kinds of laws to be enjoined ahead of time, then this kind of effect will happen in many, many other states. Around, I think, 12 states from my last count have either said they are going to pass a law similar to that or have laws similar to that being drafted with a promise to put them on the books as soon as possible. So that's kind of where we are. The Supreme Court right now has a petition that was appealed from the Fifth Circuit to the Supreme Court by the Department of Justice to say, hey, this Texas law has already had a big negative effect. You said it's fine. It's not fine. It has stopped abortions. You need to do something. And the state of Texas has filed its paperwork, its response today, which, among other things, says, well, you should take this as an opportunity to overturn Roe entirely. So that's kind of where we are. So I don't know if you all have any questions about all of that. It's kind of a lot. But just so you know, there are also other cases moving up towards the Supreme Court, including a case, I think, when I say Kentucky, that was heard recently, where the Attorney General of Kentucky was trying to get into a case dealing with D&E, which is the most common procedure used for abortions in the second trimester. There's a Kentucky ban, and then that law was, the state decided, the governor decided not to pursue that law in the courts, and so the AG is trying to get into that case, and that was a hearing before the Supreme Court. So there are possibilities in the future of not just, even if Roe isn't overturned, there are other cases that can severely restrict the kinds of procedures that can be used for abortion care, the kind of reasons that can be used to justify abortions. There are other kinds of cases that are also percolating their way up to the Supreme Court that will have serious kind of impact on access to care across the country. All right.
Galina, I think thank you for making clear, very clear, how dire the situation is, and the threat to reproductive rights. I'm sure our members have questions, so please remember to put them in the chat area. We'll be coming back in a few minutes after we talk to our next speaker to have questions for everybody at the same time. So our next speaker is Han Jones. She's the political director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia. Before this role, Han had worked on elections across the Commonwealth and the country for representatives that fight for reproductive rights, equity, and progress. Han is passionate about making Virginia a safe and equitable place for everyone. Han, hopefully you have maybe some better, more hopeful information. Thank you.
Unfortunately, not I wouldn't say more hopeful, but I always love presenting with Galina because Galina is a lawyer and I am very not a lawyer. So I really want to actually take this moment to kind of zero in a little bit on Virginia and what we're looking at here and what's really at stake. I think a lot of people feel like this election is either in the bag or nothing too bad can happen. And I really want to disillusion all of us of that concept right now. While the state Senate is not up for re-election and we do have a 21-19 Democratic majority there, I do want to make clear, because this is something I think not everyone understands. In the state Senate, we do not have a reproductive rights majority. We are in a tie. There is a state senator who is a Democrat, my personal state senator, love that, who consistently votes against reproductive rights and has said recently in a newspaper article that he plans to continue to do so. Kind of no matter what, he's going to be voting against reproductive rights legislation. In just the past couple of years, we have counted on Justin Fairfax quite a few times to break ties. What that means is that in this election, we have the ability to lose the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the entire House of Delegates, and the state Senate in this one election. Because if the lieutenant governor is not a pro-reproductive rights person who can break those ties for us, we do not have the state Senate. And the person who would be LG if the Republicans did win has said very specifically that she would love to pass a Texas-style abortion ban here in Virginia. So we know that Glenn Youngkin has we caught him on video having said very specifically that he doesn't want to talk about abortion rights because he knows that the vast majority of Virginians support access to safe legal abortion. About 79% of Virginians support access to safe legal abortion. What we know is that he is not with us on this. He is anti-reproductive rights. He has said specifically he wants to go on the offense. He wants to defund Planned Parenthood. He wants to take away reproductive health care. He's been campaigning with extreme anti-reproductive rights activists like Charmaine Yost, who's been a leader in passing anti-abortion legislation, is someone who has actively applauded on stage when talking about health centers closing. And not only do we have these massive risks, but in the House of Delegates, there are in very close races a number of reproductive rights champions, incumbents, who could very well lose their seats to anti-reproductive rights Republican candidates. A couple that come to mind off the top of my head is a delegate, Nancy Guy, in a very close race. She won by just a handful of votes. I don't want to get the number wrong, but I think it was like 28 votes that she won by in 2019. She's running against a very extreme anti-abortion candidate who has actively said that if he wins, he wants to donate his salary to crisis pregnancy centers, which are fake healthcare centers that have no responsibility to give accurate medical information. And the American Medical Association has in fact called them unethical. Again, Kelly Converse Fowler, delegate in the 21st district, is running against someone who actively runs a crisis pregnancy center. Delegate Alex Askew also running against someone who has worked with crisis pregnancy centers. Delegate Rodney Willett in Henrico is running against Mary Margaret Castleberg, who in her most recent debate appearance said that she wants to end abortion. Now, she didn't say ban, she said that she wants to end abortion by, again, donating to crisis pregnancy centers. We're seeing across the board a movement away with these Republicans from providing reproductive health care to manipulating and guilting people into not accessing abortion in a way that they think will end abortion rights and abortion care here in Virginia. In just this one election, we have a lot at stake. It is so important that we're talking about these issues and really getting the word out about what really is at stake in this moment. I know I've been knocking doors in my bright pink Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia t-shirt, and I've had a lot of people open their door and start with, we can't let Virginia become Texas. And they're absolutely right. And it is not impossible for that to happen. We are just one election away from going from being in the South, one of the best states for reproductive rights, to having an abortion ban, just like so many of these other states. And that's really what's at stake. And that's why it's so important that everyone vote, tell your friends and family to vote, knock doors, make phone calls. I mean, the fact that I know so many of you from being an organizer means that most of you are volunteering probably already, and I appreciate everything you're doing. But yeah, this election really shows how much is at stake for reproductive rights. And not only that, but reproductive rights is actually how we are going to be successful in this election. Because so many Virginians do support access to abortion and are actively afraid of losing that right. We're seeing that this is a very important contrast point for candidates to point out. I think that some people who don't necessarily look into politics that much, maybe don't understand too many differences between Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin, can see very clearly what that is, what that difference is, and that this is a contrast point. This is a point that really differentiates us, is that Democrats are supporting reproductive rights and abortion care access, and Republicans are actively trying to take away a Virginian's right to make their own decisions about their health care. So I know I just kind of said a lot of gloom and doom and scary things, and I apologize for that.
We need to hear them. Thank you, Han, very much. Now, Virginia Dougherty of the Seville Now Board will open up the Q&A for Galina and Han. Virginia, I'll turn it over to you. Please, all the members, please put your questions in the chat for Han and Galina. Thank you.
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm so sorry, but I can't get my video to work.
I had that problem earlier.
Yeah, and I also don't understand. I'm getting an echo in my phone. Does anyone know how to get rid of that?
It doesn't seem to be coming across as an echo, so it's unfortunately it'll only bother you. Can you handle it?
I'll try. Okay, so we have one question that Galina has answered, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about it. The question is people's concern not only for overturning Roe, but actually criminalizing abortion?
So the answer to that question is yes. One, in Virginia specifically, abortion, the laws regulating abortion are found in the criminal code. So they're not in the civil code, they're not treated like other healthcare, they're found in the criminal code. And part of the problem with that has been that there have been more than one case in Virginia where prosecutors have tried to prosecute women, pregnant women, for pregnancy outcomes under specifically the abortion code. Even though the way the code is written, one should not be able to use it against the pregnant person themselves. But nevertheless, we've had prosecutors try it, and we've had at least one judge in a state, just as circuit court, say that's fine. That case was dropped later for other reasons, but there's no higher court ruling in Virginia that says that prosecutors cannot use the abortion code to prosecute a pregnant person themselves. Also, across the country, there have been multiple laws, not just abortion related laws, but other laws used by prosecutors to criminalize pregnancy outcomes for people they find to be objectionable. So recently, there was an article about a woman who was convicted for manslaughter because she had her fetus died because of some drug use, and she was convicted of manslaughter for the death of the fetus. Now, there are other states and other laws similar to that and other cases that have been used that way. So there is a movement to not just prevent people from being able to get reproductive health care. There's a movement to punish pregnant people for pregnancy outcomes when there's an opinion that that pregnant person had some role in the pregnancy outcome. And that includes cases where a person was taking medication prescribed to them by a doctor and had, you know, the pregnancy, either it was a miscarriage or there was some bad effect on the fetus. And in those cases, prosecutors have gone after people who were taking medication prescribed by their physician. So absolutely, there's absolutely danger of that. And if in Virginia, you know, we lose the majority, and there will be people who will come in who have these opinions, like Amanda Chase, among others, who really do really want to punish pregnant people when they don't feel like they acted in the way, you know, they feel like they are at fault for a miscarriage or at fault for negative outcomes to a fetus. So, yep. I don't know, Pawan, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Galina pretty much covered it. I think that what we are seeing is an attack on pregnant people, kind of more broadly, whether they are having an abortion, an elective abortion, or if something just happens. And I think that should be really scary for everyone.
Yep.
Thank you. We have another question. How can we pass a bill to codify Roe? Get a constitutional amendment going? And this is for both of you. So Han, could you start?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is I think that there's a way for us to pass legislation that isn't necessarily a constitutional amendment. I think I know Terry McAuliffe has spoken about constitutional amendment codifying Roe v. Wade. But I think that there is legislation that we can pass to both codify Roe v. Wade and add decriminalization measures as well that don't necessarily look that way. I think there's a couple of different ways that we can look at doing this. Galina, do you want to add more to that? I know you're the lawyer in the room.
Sure. So yes, we're the Virginia Reproductive Equity Alliance is a coalition of organizations in Virginia working on repro issues, and we are working on a bill to specifically take abortion out of the criminal code and codify Roe. There are a couple of reasons why a bill works better and faster than a constitutional amendment, because in Virginia, as you all probably know, in order to pass a constitutional amendment, it has to pass the majority in both chambers, and a lieutenant governor cannot break a tie on a constitutional amendment. And in the Senate, we have a pro and anti-choice tie, unfortunately. Thank you, Senator Morrissey. And then and then it has to pass again, both the House and the Senate, on a majority before going on the ballot. So it's a longer process. I don't think anybody is in the repro world is kind of saying that a constitutional amendment is a bad thing. It's just, while we might not be able to accomplish that right now, a good intermediate step, a solid intermediate step, is to get abortion out of the criminal code so those laws cannot be used by zealous prosecutors to hurt people, and also codify Roe so that we can have some protections, and especially some protections against, let's say we keep the legislature but have a bad administration, to have some protections against a potential future bad administration who might want to use regulations to attack abortion. We want to ensure that that's not something that they can do. And if you have any more specific questions, happy to answer those and get into the weeds, but that's just the rough sort of answer to that.
Yeah, and,
So
and with
right-
the current situation with
Right
this,
now, there's no bill made up yet.
no, not at the moment. There's not been a bill introduced. And I think it's important to just point out that the LG can break a tie on
A
legislation,
bill, right?
but not
Bill,
an
but not a
amendment.
constitutional amendment. So there is a bill being drafted right now that will hopefully be introduced this session, provided, you know, we all do our job and we keep the majority.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on what Galina is saying is like, if the election this year does not go well, there is no chance of this kind of getting through. Like, it is so important for us to like anything legislatively that we're looking at doing that we would like to do to move things forward would not be possible if these elections go as poorly as they feasibly could. So again, not to be doom and gloom about this election, but it's so very important, because I think that codifying this is so important, and getting some of this stuff out of the criminal code is so important, but it just will not be possible. It's already just razor thin whether or not we'd be able to do it this year, because we also often lose a vote or two in the House of Delegates, and not necessarily that they vote against whatever legislation is in favor of reproductive rights, but that they abstain, they don't vote. So we already are kind of on the knife's edge with being able to do anything, even if things stayed exactly as they are. So, you know, just to point out, like, we definitely need to get this legislation passed, and it's going to be, it really all hangs on November.
Okay, one other question. Why isn't it true that we're losing a lot of public support that the Republicans have actually taken control in some ways of the public mind about this? And why can't we do more to speak to people and remind them of what this all means to women, the meaning to women's lives, and that sort of thing? I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so I can speak to that briefly. I mean, the Republicans are always trying to change the narrative, right? And the reason that they are always trying to change the narrative and the way we're discussing reproductive rights and abortion access is because they know it's a losing argument for them. They are very much in the minority on this issue. This is not an issue that they can really win voters with, and they know that. So they're trying to change the way it's talked about, and a lot of that is through blatant misinformation. I'm sure that some of you have heard, oh, they support abortion up until and including birth. That is not how abortion care works, and we should not buy into these false narratives that they're trying to draw. And there's a lot of money behind this too, and I think that that's worth pointing out. A huge amount of money just went to a group that's an anti-abortion rights group that is now running digital ads calling competitive campaigns or Democratic candidates in competitive races, calling them abortion extremists, and saying things about them supporting abortion up until birth. And none of this is real. None of this is accurate. And that's a group called Women Speak Out that is running these ads. They're trying to make it sound like it is a very normal thing to be opposed to abortion care, and that abortion care looks like something that it absolutely does not look like. So the best way that we can fight back against this, and I say this because we do this a lot at Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia, is if you have a reproductive health care story, tell your story. And it doesn't need to be about abortion. It can be about how you went and accessed birth control. It could be about how you got a long-acting reversible contraceptive. But talk about reproductive health care. Renormalize this, because a lot of folks will have to seek abortion care at some point in their lives. It's a lot more people than most people think. And changing the way we talk about this and destigmatizing what it looks like to seek reproductive health care or have an abortion is such an important part of this. And Galina, I'm sure that there's stuff you'd like to add as well.
I think that pretty much covers a lot of what I would say. I would also say that it's also important to mention to folks who might have a personal issue with abortion that it's not just about abortion, that it is about the full range of reproductive health care. They're not just coming for abortions, they're also coming for birth control, right? There are other things in this bucket. They're coming for the full range of reproductive health care. And the portion that is really scary is that, it used to be, we care about the pregnant woman, right? We won't do anything to her. We want to, lower abortions by other means. And now there's an actual concerted effort to punish and criminalize pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. And that is extreme. That is far beyond the pale of what was even in the zeitgeist 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Like they have moved the goalpost to such an extreme degree that we should be able to make that case. And I know that we're working on making that case. I know that Planned Parenthood is working on making that case. Sort of, I think that the question of money is really important. When you have millions of dollars being pumped into a narrative on social media, it can be hard to combat. But the best way, like Han said, is to combat it with personal stories, to really have those conversations.
But my question is, I know one-to-one is good, but what about, shouldn't we be running ads? Shouldn't we be getting on social media? I mean, as organizations, because this is like you said, they're putting money behind this.
We are
Absolutely.
running ads, right?
Yeah.
I think Planned Parenthood is too. We're definitely doing all of those things, and there's some money coming in behind that. There's somebody the other day, the Family Foundation is hiring an attorney to work for them, and they're paying some obscene amount of money. That's more than any of us see in the nonprofit world on this side. And someone's like, the bad guys always pay more. They always have more money because they have the money coming in from out of state. But we're definitely, like, there are ads from NARAL, there are ads from Planned Parenthood, there's definitely digital work being done out there.
And you would likely not be the people to see that, is the other thing to be aware of. Our targeting is like Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia we just launched I think it targets over 600,000 voters across Virginia. It's a statewide GOTV ad talking about the importance of this election and how quickly Virginia could become Texas. And we did just launch that, but the people that we launch our ads to, and the reason you might not see this as much, is we're launching this to people who, I assume most people on this call probably vote pretty regularly, right? Probably not a ton of people who miss a ton of elections in November. We are specifically targeting, because like Galina said, sometimes the bad guys get more money. That's okay. We need to be smart about how we spend our money, which means that we are targeting specifically voters that we know maybe voted in 2020 because they knew that they had to get rid of Donald Trump, but maybe they're just a little less motivated this year because Joe Biden's president. And do statewide elections really matter? Spoiler alert, they totally do. But not everyone necessarily knows that. So we 100% are communicating. I know at Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia, we have a paid canvas program. We're doing volunteer canvassing, we're doing mail, we're doing digital, we're doing a bunch of press events, and we're doing everything we can to get the word out about this. But just like you said, they do have a lot of energy behind them, which is why we count on folks like you to help in ways that money can't buy, and to talk to your people and remind them about this important election and what's really at stake.
Thank you so much. There's two other questions, but you've answered them in the chat. One who is drafting a bill, and Galina says she's drafting a bill. And another question was who might be a patron for that bill, and that is still something people are conversing about, who can sponsor the bill. So if not any other questions, I think that we will stop right here with these and turn it back to our moderator, Kathy.
Right. And just so everyone knows, I have to hop off. I have another engagement, but folks have my information. So if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And, thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
I was saying thank you to Galina before she left, but thank you to Han and Virginia as well for the Q&A. I think it was really enlightening, and that hopefully it will get everybody out motivated to get more people to the polls, because that's what we really need. Next, we have Donna Price talking to us. She's a transgender woman and retired Captain U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps. In the Navy, Donna served as a prosecutor, defense counsel, and military judge, was a congressional liaison for all personnel and medical issues, and was the commanding officer of the Navy's largest legal office. Other previous work includes Senior Vice President, Privacy and Compliance, and Chief Compliance Officer for a contractor in the military's TRICARE arena. Currently, Donna is adjunct professor at the University of Richmond Law School, teaching sexual orientation and gender identity law, engages in the private practice of law, and serves as vice chair of the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors. Donna, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kathy. And I want to follow up a little bit with what Han and Galina were just talking about, because as she mentioned, right now we have a 55-45 majority in the House of Delegates, but every delegate is up for election this year. We have a 21-19 majority in the state Senate, and we have the governor, lieutenant governor, and the attorney general. In response to the question about, a bill versus a constitutional amendment, and as Galina mentioned, for a constitutional amendment, it has to pass the majority of both the House of Delegates and the Senate, exact language, identical language. And then the next year, that exact same language again has to pass both the House and the Senate. Then it goes, and the majority of the residents in the Commonwealth who vote have to vote to approve the constitutional amendment. It's one of the reasons why the Redistricting Commission became somewhat controversial, because there were some changes that many people wanted in that constitutional amendment proposal. But if any word was changed, process and then get on the ballot again. A bill, on the other hand, only requires a majority plus the governor's signature. And if the governor vetoes it, then it requires 2/3 majority in both the House of Delegates and the Senate to overturn the veto. The problem, of course, with the bill is we could pass a bill now, but if we lose the next election or two and we lose the governorship, the Senate, and the House, then the new majority can simply cancel out that bill. So yes, we need a law because a law is better than no law, but we really do need a constitutional amendment. And unless we see that we're going to get a good majority to hold the House, the Senate, and the governor for basically about a 3-year period, it's very difficult to get a constitutional amendment. Now, the reason I wanted to start off with that is because that is exactly the same issue that we're dealing with on transgender rights. Virginia was the first Southern state to pass an Equality Act. But if we lose the governor and the state legislature, then they can just cancel that out. And we are right back where we started again. So I really think that it's critical that we win the election this time. And it's really more important that we do even better, because now we are. And if you've been following it, the Redistricting Commission has basically failed, which means it's looking to go into a Republican-controlled Supreme Court. And we have no idea what may end up coming out of redistricting. And everything that applies with regard to abortion applies also in the area of transgender rights. Between 2015 and 2019, there were 200 bills, anti-transgender bills, that were initiated in state legislatures run by Republicans around the United States. 200 over a 4 to 5 year window. This year alone, there are more than 200 anti-transgender bills that have been initiated in Republican-controlled legislatures. So everything that applies to reproductive rights in Texas could apply with regard to LGBTQ, and in particular tonight, we're going to talk about transgender rights in Virginia. So we are far from in where we are. I want to talk very briefly about, what does it mean to be transgender? Well, we've got 5 different things that we talk about with regard to sexual identity and orientation. First, we have sex. On the binary, that means a penis or vagina. But we know we also have individuals who are intersex or have ambiguous genitalia. So it's not as simple as a penis or a vagina determines who you are. Then we talk about gender. Gender is identity. On the binary, does someone identify as male or female? But we know that there's more than just the binary, that there are people who are agender, bigender, gender fluid, gender queer, non-binary, transgender individuals, where a binary of identifying as either male or female does not comport with their individual identity. Everyone knows about sexual orientation, and years ago we would talk about gay or straight, but we know there's bisexual, pansexual, and many other different sexualities as well. But orientations, a lot of people overlook, so you may be more attracted on a friend basis with someone of your same gender or sex, whereas on a sexual orientation basis, you may be more attracted to someone else. And in our world, we talk about sex as what's between your legs, gender is what's between your ears, sexual orientation is who you go to bed with, gender identity is who you go to bed as, those sorts of things. And then the last area really is what's called gender expression or presentation. And this is a societal or cultural construct. In Western society, historically, at least in the more recent history, women have worn skirts, men have worn pants. But in other cultures, you'll see men wearing attire that in the Western culture, you may associate more with being female. So there are all of these different components of person's identity and sexuality. And it's not just as simple as penis or vagina, boy or girl, male or female. And a lot of times people will talk about biological sex. Well, biological sex is really another misconstruction because there are 36 different chromosomal and genetic combinations of sex naturally occurring within the world. And so, for example, a person who is born with X chromosomes, you would think would be male, but if they have complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, then their body cannot process androgen and their body develops as female. So is the individual male or female? XY chromosomes, but female anatomy. So it's really much more complex than all people want to make it out to be. So one of the things that I always kind of get a kick out of is people say they're going to have a gender reveal party. Well, at most you might have a sex reveal, but you're not going to know the gender until the individual has grown up and has been able to actually identify who they believe that they are. When we talk about being transgender, there are three critical terms: insistent, persistent, and consistent. And insistent means regular, repeated, demanding. Consistent means unchanging in nature, standard, or effect over time. And persistent means continued firmly or obstinately on a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition, enduring over a long period of time. And you might be familiar with the phrase, still she persisted. And that actually is something that applies when someone is transgender. And transgender is opposed to cisgender. A heteronormative cisgender woman, for example, is an individual who's born with female anatomy, identifies as a woman. And the heteronormative would be attracted to men. But any of those things can differ. So a transgender individual, trans meaning different, means that the individual identifies differently than their anatomy would be. And that's what makes the individual transgender. The binary, male or female, boy or girl, is always easier to understand than sort of in the middle. The agender, bigender, gender fluid, gender queer, non-binary, transgender individual. So for our purposes, with the limited time we've got tonight, I want to speak about the binary. And for me, I live on the binary. I lived most of my life. I was assigned male at birth. I was born with male, but my gender was always more feminine, more female. And so I eventually did as an adult transition. And I now live fully as a female. Medically, legally, socially, culturally, in all respects, I identify as female. So when we get to the school situation, I think what many people overlook is the reality of an individual, a student, transitioning, which is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And before that would typically happen, the individual will come out to someone. And coming out is an interesting phrase itself. And I spend a lot of time talking about how the closet was created in the 1950s between the American Psychiatric Association with the first diagnostic and statistic manual in 1952, which said that being homosexual was a psychological disorder. And in 1953, President Eisenhower issuing an executive order that barred the employment of homosexuals in the federal government or with any company that had a contract with the federal government. And that's what created the closet that homosexuals, that was before we had the full alphabet, LGBTQ+, that's what put people in the closet, because if they came out, they were determined to have a mental disease or disorder, and they could be fired from their job. And so that was a man-made construct. I call it a conspiracy between the legal and medical fields that created this barrier that we're still fighting against today. So you have an individual who is born, and I'll just use male to female because that's where I've done most of my research and my life experience, who knows that things just aren't right. But the body is one way, but their mind is another way. And you don't just, as if you've been living as a male, you don't just automatically one day, the next day, you're now living full-time as a woman. It doesn't work that way. It's a process. So an individual, a student, will come out to somebody and say, you know, this just isn't right. I know that my body says one thing, but my mind is telling me something different. And that might be another student. It might be a parent. It might be a teacher. We don't know who that individual will start with trying to help this individual get counseling. And notice, I'm going to differentiate between counseling and therapy. With the last DSM that came out in 2012, the American Psychiatric Association realized that having gender dysphoria is not a mental disease or defect. It is a dysphoria. It is a stress, a depression aspect of society that does not accept the individual's reality. And so the counseling is to help the individual to learn how to societally with living in a body in a society that is unwilling to accept the totality of who this person is, which is different than therapy, which is trying to correct an emotional disorder. And so that's where the process will start. Now, in 2020, Virginia passed a law that required that all school systems enact a transgender favorable or positive policy. I personally believe that the jurisdictions have not adopted that are doing so because their hope is upcoming elections, there's going to be regime change in Richmond. And that if the conservatives can take over, then they'll be able to revoke this law. As I mentioned at the beginning, all it takes is a majority in the House of Delegates and the Senate and a governor, and you can change any law that's been passed before. So I think these school boards, they're hoping that in this election and going forward, that the Democrats who support favorable transgender policies will be out of control and they'll be able to change this. And again, with redistricting, we have no idea what may happen. Right now, there's risk of losing the governorship as well as the House of Delegates. The state Senate doesn't come up again until 2023. So when the individual comes out, the school policies in Albemarle County are designed to help the student to come up with a positive plan of support. And that plan includes hoping and helping to get the student and the student's family to see that this really is an issue that needs to be addressed and the student needs to be supported. Now, right now, literally this evening on the news, and I had done some research on it the last few days, there is a case coming out of Loudoun County, which is being mischaracterized in large respect by right-wing media and is being used to show, aha, we cannot have biological males in women's restrooms. There was a student in May of last year at a Loudoun County high school who sexually assaulted a male student, sexually assaulted a female student. That student was then taken out of that school, sent to another school where another sexual assault took place. Now, the first sexual assault, there are a lot of statements that are being made that I have not yet been able to corroborate as being factually accurate, but right-wing media is using this as the red herring against all positive transgender policies. First off, that assault took place in May of last year, and Loudoun County did not enact a transgender policy until August of last year. So this sexual assault this alleged sexual assault did not take place under the policy, it took place before the policy. The second thing that's being alleged is that it took place in a restroom, and that has not yet been fully verified. It may have been, it may not have been. The first assault. The second assault, alleged assault, took place in a classroom. So what we have is an alleged perpetrator who just happens to look for a target of opportunity and a place of opportunity. This is not necessarily a transgender individual who took advantage of a positive transgender policy. The next thing is that the father of the alleged victim from the first assault appeared at the Loudoun County School Board meeting and got into an altercation, a verbal altercation with another parent in the room, and was arrested for obstruction of, I can't even think of the term right now, but, disorderly conduct. Now, the right-wing media has now claimed that he was arrested because he wanted to speak out about the policy and was prevented from speaking out against the policy, when in fact he had not actually signed up to speak before the board. So there's a lot of information that's being, some of which may be true, but has yet to be proven to be true. And it's essentially a red herring trying to say that a transgender individual, a biological male, should not be permitted in a female rest or locker space. One of the curious things is I never hear it the other way around. I never hear any concerns about a transgender male, which is an individual identified female at birth, who is transitioning and living as a female, being in a male restroom, and that individual would be every bit as much at risk if their identity was then disclosed as a transgender woman in a woman's restroom. It's only the trans women that they seem to care about. The other thing is, with regard to these red herrings, just last week, a woman was raped on a Philadelphia transit train by a man, and all of the passengers just stood there and either watched or recorded it. But we don't hear an outcry against men on transit trains. I don't see the same sort of an outcry about men who have been caught hundreds of times putting cameras into women's locker room or restroom facilities. The transgender population is an extremely small segment of the population, but it is a wedge issue that the right wing is trying to use with a lot of red herrings. A transgender individual is hundreds of times more likely to be the victim of assault than to perpetuate an assault. And the statistics show 41% of transgender individuals have attempted suicide. 84% of transgender students in Virginia have reported being bullied or harassed in school. And if a student is bullied or harassed in school, the odds are likely that they will drop out of school, or if they remain in school, that their grades will drop, their achievement will drop, and their life will be forever impacted upon this. So the favorable transgender policies in the schools are designed to protect the student and allow them to have full participation in academic and other activities at school and achieve the same educational outcomes that every other student should have. So that's kind of a quick and dirty on the process. I can talk more about the actual transition itself actually is a period of counseling, and then a gradual period of time where the individual starts to change their outward appearance. So for example, when I was a captain in the Navy, male with short hair, I didn't just show up one day, looking as a woman, because of course, back when I was serving, I would have been discharged. It's only been very recently that transgender individuals have been able to openly serve in the military. And it is a lengthy process that someone goes through. And the school will work with the student to ensure, again, that it is insistent, consistent, and persistent identification of gender that this individual student is displaying as part of that entire process. So with that, I'm ready to answer any questions that someone have. So I'll just turn it back over to Kathy.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight on these issues. I know many of us have questions, and if everybody can put those in the chat, we'll get to that again in a few minutes with Amy. But in the meantime, we'll allow Jessica Berg, our next speaker. Jessica is a teacher in Loudoun County, Virginia, who developed a Women in Gender Studies course for high school. Previously, Jessica created the Miss Phoenix organization to empower students to use their voice and started a scholarship fund, The Future is Female, to help assist aspiring young women achieve their academic goals after high school. Currently, Jessica serves as Vice President of Education and Outreach for Loudoun County Now, and is co-founder of Virginia Gender Equity in Education Coalition, which is working on legislation to require women and gender studies be offered for high school throughout the Commonwealth. Jessica, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I'm sure you're all glad to hear from a teacher in Loudoun County after Donna's story. There is a lot going on up here right now. So just piggybacking off what she said, you know, as a teacher in this school district and what's going on and how the right is twisting these scenarios, you know, the core of the story is the fact that sexual assault occurred, and it has been occurring for, you know, forever at our schools and on our college campuses. And so like we have to tackle that issue. So our chapter of Now is having a meeting on Tuesday, which I'll drop the meeting link if you're all interested. We're going to have like a Title IX coordinator on and some people to talk about this epidemic of sexual assault and what we can do to help and prevent it, you know, especially for our students, because it's something just in myself as a teacher and students that have come to confide in me about it. The process is arduous, never rewarding, and it's just gotten really bad, and especially with certain groups now twisting stories and using it for their own means. Like, let's just focus on the one issue here. A sexual assault occurred. What can we do to fix that? So I will drop the link and invite you all to join us for that. But briefly, I just wanted to talk about my work as an educator and writing and creating the Women and Gender Studies course for high school, and as a co-founder of our Virginia Gender Equity and Education Coalition, what we're trying to do in the state of Virginia. And I kind of always start out these little presentations with, you know, when we think of the term feminism, which is kind of like a, you know, ooh, so it has a big negative connotation, it really boils down to the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. And I always tell students, if you agree with that, welcome to the club, you're a feminist. And again, in this group, I'm sure, as we all have just heard, in terms of reproductive rights, transgender rights, what we're seeing politically, knowing a wage gap occurs, and probably where we spend a majority of our time in that social setting, and just movies, TV, books, representation, we're not seeing ourselves, the broader citizens of America represented. I don't know if you all know, like just recently what's happening at Netflix with like kind of the walkouts and strikes in regard to the Chappelle show and his kind of anti-trans rhetoric and jokes and stuff. And really all activists were saying was we want equal representation. They weren't actually asking for his special to be taken down. But that's a big thing. Like, you know, Charlotte said at the top, you can't be what you can't see. And we don't have this representation in all of our stories being told. I always use the little anecdote. My mother-in-law told me when her daughter, my sister-in-law, was about 5 or 6, they were at a restaurant. It was one of those placemats with all the faces of the presidents on it. And her, you know, 5-year-old looked at it and said, "Oh, so girls can't be president?" And my mother-in-law was like, "No, where would you get that idea? Of course you can. You can be anything you want to be." But we can't see that. And, you know, for me, I've always held this firm belief, maybe somewhat naively and idealistically, that education can really be the start of this change. And, you know, I don't know if you saw them when they came in before bedtime, but I have 2 daughters now. And if they were to look at that map placemat of the presidents, they would think that same thing, because we're not seeing ourselves represented. And the thing with education, as I came to understand through some research just in my own county, is part of the problem. I'll just give a couple for instances because Charlotte mentioned the study the National Women's History Museum did on a national scale, K through 12 standards in education and history of named figures, you know, one woman for every 3 men. And what I love about that study too is they broke it down even further by race. And obviously a majority are white women. And then it's by how they are named. And a lot of those white women, Eleanor Roosevelt, Dolly Madison, Martha Washington, are named in reference to who they're married to, not in terms of what they did in their own right. So again, we're not seeing ourselves represented. And in Loudoun County, I did some research and looked up, I'm an English teacher, and our curriculum, 9th through 12th grade, of all the books suggested and required, less than 30% were by female authors, far fewer women of color or people from the LGBTQIA community. And that doesn't necessarily mean a teacher is picking that book to teach. You kind of teach what we were taught, you know, the same stories over and over again. And so again, education where it should be a solution and we should be giving our students this greater access to narrative and more than the single story of our history, we're not. And so that's kind of what fueled me after the 2016 election, because I took my daughter to vote with me and the next day was my birthday and it was probably the worst birthday of my life. And I was like, I got to do something. So I wrote and created and fought for this course to be added to our program of studies in Loudoun County. This is my 4th year of teaching it, and now it's in 7 high schools in our county. And so then through my work with Loudoun County now, we decided, okay, how are we going to spread this? And so we started this Virginia Gender Equity in Education Coalition to take this course and spread it throughout the Commonwealth. And we kind of have a 3-pronged approach. One is the legislation piece, because as we all know, there are going to be certain school districts and areas reluctant to offer a course in women and gender studies where we do talk about reproductive rights and LGBTQIA history and the Stonewall riots and intersectional feminism and all that stuff. You know, we see how people are reacting now to critical race theory, which is not something that's in a curriculum. So, you know, wait till they actually see what's in this curriculum. So the legislation piece would be to mandate it as an elective. You know, not every student has to take it, but it's at least there, the option for students should they want to. The other piece, which I'm kind of spearheading in that approach, is just educator to educator, school by school. You know, working with Fairfax County, which is a large county right next door to us. And there's a lot of interest from teachers and, you know, just emails between me and them. Hey, I've written the curriculum. You know, as teachers, we always say you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Here's all my stuff. You just have to figure out the process of what it takes in your district to get a course added to that program of studies. And it's a little different in each district there. And then the third approach, which we're also working on, and my personal state senator, Senator Boysko, is spearheading, is like, we actually need to change the curriculum of our history courses and English courses and math and science to be more inclusive, you know, and so that it shouldn't have to fall on an elective, that there just should be more voices of what's happening. But again, obviously we know the blocks we're going to come up against when, you know, they're like, oh no, you can't teach something like the 1619 project, which is, you know, ridiculous. And the same thing with books. I don't know if you all know, but in Loudoun County, because again, we've been in the news so much over the past 3-4 years, all for not great reasons. As English teachers, it's a fantastic thing. We got these diverse libraries, which I'm talking hundreds of books for our personal classroom libraries, where previously, like, I was funding that myself, just buying books, used books if I could, to put them back there for kids to read. These are books that are not required reading. Kids are just allowed to pick them up. And, you know, they're all books that are award-winning. There was like a panel of librarians and teachers that chose them. And there's been a massive outcry to ban these libraries, to ban the books in them, because of certain stories about with LGBTQIA characters, you know, even down to the elementary school level. You know, I went and spoke at the school board several times in regard to that, like, just give us our books, like, let us have our books, you know. So part of me being here tonight, you know, with Charlottesville now is one, it's kind of a second home. I spent my college years down at UVA in Charlottesville, but also in that networking factor of educator to educator. My kind of ask, and I'll drop my our email and our socials in the chat, is that, you know, I'm sure all of us know a teacher or someone in the school system, to just put me in contact with them or pass along their information, because that's how I'm kind of working now, is just letting other educators know that this is a course. It has been written, there's curriculum, there's lessons plans, it's attached to standards in our SOLs. I have been teaching it for 4 years, and I want to give you, you know, all this work and have as many students as possible take this, because in just tonight, the two issues we heard at the top of the meeting on reproductive rights, you know, majority of the students that take it are female, and I also have a lot of LGBTQ students. And just the simple things, they don't know about their own anatomy and their reproductive rights. When we were talking about the 6-week ban in Texas, I kind of explained, you know, why a woman might not know she's pregnant at that moment, and, you know, even how your body alternates ovary to ovary every year when you're menstruating. And like, they just didn't know. They had no idea. And the same thing as Donna spoke to in all of the different identifications for people, like, people are just, they don't know. And that lack of education leads to the ignorance, which leads to the fear mongering, as we're seeing from, you know, groups and political parties to push their own agenda. You know, so I still hold on to that very idealistic hope that education can be part of the solution, you know, and maybe hopefully start with a course like this, and educating that next generation. And I will tell you, they, like, being in the classroom, these students, they give me hope. They have come in, as my 11th year teaching, each year they come in more aware, more motivated, and for all the awful, horrible things we've faced under the Trump administration, it awakened something in this younger generation, you know, that we saw on a national scale, and I see in the classroom in my experiences with these students. So that is the one thing where I'm like, okay, maybe, you know, not all is lost. We just have to give them the tools to keep fighting for that. So yeah. So, oh wait, sorry, I see a couple.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate that. And yes, it has to be education and in legislation as well. We have to attack it from all directions. So now Amy Laufer, who is also on the board of Charlottesville now, will facilitate the Q&A for Donna and Jessica. So if you haven't already, enter your questions in the chat and take it away, Amy.
Thank you. I want to just say how inspiring both of you were. Just amazing. So we do have a question about Albemarle County and how has it responded to the new transgender policies? I think, Donna, maybe you could answer that.
Amy, and actually I see another question I'd like to address above that about the vaccinations and everything. The question says, controlling our lives is how Dems appear to be willing to support vaccines, which is twisting the necessity of good health advocating in the first place. Well, let me talk. When I saw the question, I quickly looked up. these are the vaccinations that I've had: hepatitis B, rotavirus, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, flu, pneumococcal conjugate, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, varicella, COVID-19. Those are pretty common in the United States. Because I've traveled and lived internationally, I've also had anthrax, cholera, hepatitis A, rabies. Yes, my family actually all had to have the rabies vaccine one time, typhoid, yellow fever, and now they've got one for malaria. What I'm always puzzled with when I see people who don't want to take this vaccine, and they very frequently, I mean, I think it's mostly political, truth be told, because, you know, over 700,000 Americans have died. And it's not just those that have died. There are those who have suffered from long COVID, which means they have long-term, perhaps permanent disabling conditions as a result of having been infected by the pandemic. And it's a horrible death. I've read The Bloated Bodies, The Dying Alone, No Family Can See You. And I kind of equate the reluctance to have the vaccine with what I experienced as an attorney in the military with people who claim to be conscientious objectors. You can be a conscientious objector, but to be a conscientious objector, you have to object to all wars, not just this war. You can't say, well, I object to the war in Iraq, but not the war in Afghanistan. That doesn't make you a conscientious objector. You have to object to all. So if someone is going to say, you know, my beliefs are such that I can't take the vaccine, then I would ask, how many of these other vaccines, about 30 that I listed, have you had? And if so, then you're not really objecting to vaccinations. You just, this one particular one. So I also looked up what religions, because people say it's against my religious belief. Well, there are two churches who openly discourage vaccinations. That would be the Church of Christ Scientists. There's somewhere between 100 and 400,000 in the United States, or the Dutch Reformed Church, and there are about 200,000 in the United States. There are three other recognized, nationally recognized religions that tend to discourage some medical intervention, and those are Jehovah's Witnesses, Amish, or Scientologists. And so I basically just have to say that I think that is not a reasonable complaint or excuse that many people are using not to take the vaccination. I believe it's political, not scientific, and clearly not medical. Turning to the second question, I want to be very clear. I am on the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors, not the Albemarle County School Board. The only thing that the Board of Supervisors has to do with the schools is each year, the Board of Supervisors transfers 60% of our revenue from all sources to the schools, and then they spend that money according to how they decide. The school board is an elected body, just as the Board of Supervisors is. But the school board does not have the authority to generate or raise taxes. So anyway, that's the difference. Now, in preparation for tonight, however, I did consult with 4 different members of the Albemarle County School Board, and I did get the information from them, and I did have an opportunity to discuss with all 4 of them. And basically, it has been a non-issue in Albemarle County. There were a few parents who raised some questions about the policy, but once it was explained that, you know, it's working with the students, working to try and get the students and the family together to understand what is going on and to be supportive of the student in compliance with federal and state law, then there really has not been an outcry. Some of our surrounding communities, I have to say, have. When their school boards have met, it was pretty vocal anti-transgender equality experiences for some people. And I have some friends who spoke up at some of the neighboring community school boards and actually were fearful for their life. There was a lot of anger and resentment. But again, part of that is we're living in an era of anger and hate. But I think mostly what it is that those who are raising this issue are raising it as red herrings, false flags, and as a wedge cultural issue, when it generally is not a significant issue for the students or the schools or most of their parents. So in Albemarle County, from what was reported to me by the 4 members of the school board I communicated with, it has literally been a non-issue in Albemarle County in the schools itself. And I would suspect that in our surrounding communities, in the schools itself, it has largely been a non-issue. That's not to say bullying does not occur. Bullying does occur, but bullying occurs more frequently where you do not have supportive policies than they do where you have supportive policies. And finally, the policies that were adopted in Albemarle County were basically replicated of the policies that were enacted during the civil rights desegregation era. It's using the same mental approach to taking care of transgender students that was used to take care of minority Black students once we got through massive resistance and actually integrated our schools. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is regarding the 2 sexual assaults at Loudoun County schools. What can we do to counter the misinformation being spread? And what can we do in Charlottesville, Albemarle County to prevent conservative parents from cynically portraying themselves as the protectors of girls when their only interest in using them to attack transgender students? And then one other question we can go to next.
Well, Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, that's the hard part, because again, you know, when Han and Galina were speaking and there was a question of messaging, you know, from the pro-choice side, me being the teacher, you know, dropped a book and podcast suggestion, but it's phenomenal. It was by Elise Hogan and Ellie Langford from NARAL, and you can listen to the podcast talking about how long and how entrenched and massive the propaganda machine has been, you know, for the Republican and the GOP, so much so that at one point they were talking about, you know, in their rhetoric, not using the term uterus because that was too cold, and instead using the term womb because that's more motherly and feminine. And so it is so hard. Again, this story already being out here in Loudoun, to kind of just dismantle the preconceived notions that people have, and you know, putting facts to these lies, because again, like Donna just said, we are so, and I think our county is just like a perfect microcosm for the nation at large. People have picked a side of the battle and they're going to believe anything that already fits their preconceived narrative, and you can do nothing to change that. And so when we talk about like, okay, how do we stop this misinformation? It's almost like you can't. That Pandora's box, that's been open, it's out there. What we can do, which is I think what we are doing in meetings like these and stuff, is giving the facts, letting it be known, and then talking about the policies behind it, which is like the Title IX policy, because they're going to use this story of these 2 assaults. One maybe happened in a bathroom, maybe the assailant is somewhere on that transgender spectrum. That is an unknown. But what we do know is that 2 assaults did happen. How can we work on that? And to the point of these parents cynically portraying themselves like of the protectors of our girls, it's funny to say that I got a message. A delegate up in my area is up for re-election, and it was like an anti-Wendy Goditis campaign, and she's like, she's, you know, letting our daughters pay the price of the liberal agenda, something like that. And I was like, these, just again, in my experience as a teacher in one county, you know, of the epidemic of sexual assault, you know, that's an issue that we should be focusing on. And then like Donna said earlier too, and you know, if we just go at it with numbers and facts, like I have a student right now, a transgender student who was sexually assaulted, and she has to go to her science class every day with the assailant. And they tried to press her family. Her mom was actually a victim's advocate, and they tried to press criminal charges, and it was going to come down to a he said, she said, and just like, I just don't want to go through that. That's almost like another violation. And so when you talk about Title IX rights, like that student is not receiving their equal access to education, having to sit in a classroom with their assailant. What can we do about that? And we know that the right. If you ask them about that particular case involving a transgender student, they don't care about that. They're just trying to twist these two, in regard. In Loudoun, it's called our 80/40 policy, which was adopted on August 1st, regarding transgender rights for students and calling them by their preferred pronoun and having gender neutral bathrooms and stuff. And that's what they're going after. That's why our school board meetings have been so contentious. That plus critical race theory, plus everything else. And it's really just, it's hard. Like we really feel like we're just shoved into such a corner, because battling all of those misinformation propaganda stories with facts, like you're arguing about critical race theory, it's nowhere in any curriculum. It's just not, it's like a college level thing, but it's falling on deaf ears. And so I wish I had an answer. I wish I knew what to do, because this is what keeps me up at night and banging my head against a wall and fighting for both my students and my children and myself. And it's, I don't know. And in regard to the Title IX, we're going to speak directly to that at our meeting on Tuesday, and have a Title IX coordinator from George Mason University come in and speak to our meeting about what changed under the Trump administration with Betsy DeVos, just, kind of shredding Title IX and actually giving, the accused assailants more rights, and like the right to interview the victim and stuff like that. So sorry for that non-answer.
No, it's very complicated, and misinformation is what's leading to a lot of this fear mongering, all of it, and anger. I know Charlotte is very mindful of the time. It is 8:37. We did have,
Amy, could I add one thing to that? There was a time when I would say the truth will set you free. We're in an era of disinformation, and that really no longer works. But part of this still is the legacy of the 1952-1953 American Psychiatric Association and Eisenhower's executive order, where they equated being homosexual or later transgender as having a mental disease. And then they equated that with pedophilia. And so you frequently will see where someone who is homosexual is equated with a pedophile, and they're totally different things. But once that narrative is out there in the society, it becomes very difficult to overcome. If you really want to talk about where sexual abuse occurs, let's talk about the Roman Catholic Church and Catholic priests. Let's talk about the Boy Scouts of America, which declared bankruptcy and has settled $850 million for the thousands upon thousands of victims. That's where the sexual abuse was taking place, not by transgender individuals in a bathroom. What's happening in the bathrooms is the transgender individual is thousands times more likely to be a victim than a perpetrator. And it's very difficult in an era of on and One American News and Fox and places like that, where people are just focused, they have it on 24/7, to get them to pay attention to facts and science.
I know that, Charlotte, are you comfortable with one more question about the legislation regarding women and gender studies being pursued? I know.
Yes, I'm very, I want to respect people's time. So we are past our ending time, but of course we will take another question. Anybody who wants to stay on. This is mesmerizing conversation, obviously. And after we've finished with the Q&A, you're welcome to stay on a bit longer. We'll have some informal chat time for a few minutes after we finish. So thank everybody for being here, and let's continue on. Thanks, Amy.
I think I can answer that question fairly quickly. Yes, it is being pursued. We've come up with come up against a lot of like roadblocks and like, oh, is this the time? Are people going to be receptive to this? Money, obviously, in adding a course and then having to budget staff in certain schools. So again, that's why we're kind of going with the three-pronged approach in, I'm just working educator to educator, one school at a time is one more school than we had the previous year. offering this course. And then, hopefully the legislation piece will continue in momentum, and will require those school districts reluctant to put a course like this into their program of studies. It would force them to. And, we do have sponsors who want to carry the bill. We are building our coalition. Again, I put my personal email in there, and then I'll drop our coalition's email in. Even if you just know a teacher who you think, oh, I know they might be interested, or they might know someone, that's where it starts, for me at least. And that's how we've kind of worked it in Loudoun and Fairfax. So I would love to talk to them, and hopefully it will happen.
Well, thank you, ladies. Kathy?
Thanks so much, Donna, Jessica, and Amy for this Q&A, and to all of our speakers who were so generous with their time and energies and helped us to a better understanding of how pressing these issues really are here in Virginia. I encourage you all again to be sure you and your friends and family vote. And Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is Han still here? I want to say thank you to Han. I think she might have just dropped off, and to Donna and to Jessica. You all were fabulous. I really appreciate you taking your time. I know you're also very busy. Thank you for being here.